We just went live, but we are still waiting for Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you, April. James, could you send her a text to make sure, or just to see if
I can do that.
we'll overcome the challenges, or if we should? Oh, I see a number.
This is Stacy, and unfortunately, my internet is not working well where I'm at, even though it worked perfect yesterday.
Well, thank you for letting us know, and sorry for your troubles there. And phone works too, so we'll carry on. And I'm glad you're connected here. So
I'll still try to connect here.
I'm sorry?
I will still try to get connected here. I don't know what's wrong, but I'll try to get my log in here. So.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to a regular meeting of the Cook County Board of Commissioners on Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021. It is now 8:33. I'll call this meeting to order. Please rise and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And next I'll read a statement regarding our virtual meetings in the pandemic. Number one, it has been determined that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the related peacetime emergency declaration made by Governor Walz in accordance with Minnesota Statutes Chapter 12. Number two, we have ensured that all members of the body participating in the meeting, wherever their physical location, can hear one another, can hear all discussion and testimony offered at today's meeting. Number three, we have also ensured that members of the public present at the regular meeting location of the body can hear all discussion, testimony, and all votes of the members of the body. We have urged the public not to attend this meeting in person because of the COVID-19 pandemic and have ensured that members of the public can view and monitor the meeting remotely in real time by broadcasting the meeting on the Cook County website. Number four, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have determined that it may be unfeasible for County Auditor Brady Powers, County Attorney Molly Hicken, County Administrator James Yorkie, and members of the Board of Commissioners to be physically present at the Cook County Boardroom, the Cook County Courthouse. Number five, all votes will be conducted by roll call, so each member's vote on each issue will be identified and recorded. All right. Now, are there any adjustments to the agenda? I don't see anyone, nor do I hear anyone. Therefore, I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Sullivan.
I move to approve the agenda as written.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there support?
Swallowson will support.
Thank you, Commissioner Swallowson. We have a motion and support. Any discussion? Assuming not, we'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Sullivan?
Aye.
Commissioner Swallowson?
Aye.
Commissioner Storley?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Mills is aye as well. Approved unanimously. Moving on to the public comment period. Administrator Yorkie, have you received any public comment, or is there anyone in the boardroom wishing to make a public comment?
No, sir, I have not received any comments.
All right. Any other commissioners have comments from the public that were wished to be read? Don't hear or see anyone. So we can move on then to the consent agenda. Would anyone like to pull anything from the consent agenda? I don't hear anyone or see anyone. So I'll look for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thoroughly approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Starley. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Sullivan seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. We'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Starley,
Aye.
Commissioner Sullivan,
Aye.
Commissioner Swallowson,
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins,
Aye.
Commissioner Mills is aye as well. We have unanimous approval of the consent agenda. And moving on to item number 4 is our Emergency Operations Command update. I see we have Grace with us. Would you like to start out, Grace?
Absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Mills. So we've had a very dynamic past 2 weeks. I'd say we've had some of the busiest weeks since the pandemic began here. I'll start with vaccination news. So we had 2 media releases go out this week already. One regarding eligibility criteria for vaccination, and the other regarding our vaccination rate as a county and what that means in terms of public health recommendations. So our eligibility criteria really mirror the Minnesota Department of Health state recommendations, and they've expanded significantly in the past 2 weeks. So they include people over the age of 65, caregivers, people 50 and over living in multi-generational households, and then a whole number of workplace-based groups, including agriculture, airport, corrections, education, healthcare, first responder, food processing, food retail, and food service, the judicial system, manufacturing, public transit, and the U.S. Postal Service. We also have eligible now people ages 45 to 64 with underlying health conditions, and people ages 18 to 44 with at least 2 underlying health conditions. There's also an additional category specific to community health centers that includes people ages 50 and older who experience social stressors. So working together with Kyle Oberg in MIS, we've put together an eligibility survey that we've modified as the eligibility criteria have changed, and that seems to be working well. We continue to open our clinics every Monday morning at 8 a.m. using that eligibility survey, and we also offer a phone-based option for people to register by calling the vaccine navigator at Sawtooth Mountain Clinic, and that number is included in our media releases every Monday morning. So it's a big group, and it was a challenge to find how to most clearly communicate that, but I think the survey does a pretty good job. We do still have 12 appointments available at this week's vaccination event on Thursday. So starting today, we're going to be doing outreach with those employment eligible groups using lists sent to us by the state of which businesses would meet the eligibility criteria for vaccination. I'm very confident that we will fill. I would say just a huge thanks to all the people behind the scenes supporting these events. We have just a tremendous volunteer base that continues to sign up for slots every week through Minnesota Responds. The community center staff have been very welcoming and great hosts for us. All the registration staff and nursing staff at Sawtooth Mountain Clinic, as well as the PHHS public health temp staff that have been really integral in getting these events off the ground. We did in the last 2 weeks hear from President Biden that he is going to be making it so that eligibility is open to all adults starting May 1st. We'll see if Minnesota opens it before then. It's kind of a wait and see situation, but May 1st really is not that far away. And I think we'll be ready to continue on in a wider, to vaccinate a wider group of eligible residents once we get the green light to do so. Our current capacity to vaccinate, we have landed at 400-person clinics as our max within the curling rink space. It seems to be working well. We did have a bit of a backup with the weather a couple weeks, I guess it was 2 weeks ago almost now when we had that snow, but it went well regardless. It just was a little slower than we usually can get people in and out within about half an hour. And then in terms of supply, we continue to receive the Moderna vaccine, which is the 2-dose mRNA vaccine that is granted emergency use authorization for people ages 18 and older. So that is the only vaccine we're currently receiving in the community. On to contact tracing. So we've had 17 cases in the past 2 weeks, which has really stretched our capacity in terms of contact tracing. But we've been able to get to all our cases quickly, and that's thank you to Jody Roberts, the public health educator, again, our public health temporary staff, and then our partners at Grand Portage Health Services, who are also integral to the contact tracing effort and have helped with making calls. So people in the community continue to be very receptive to our calls and the public health advice on isolation and quarantine. We know it's challenging for people. It's a hard ask to have someone stay home for 10 to 14 days, but it's really a sacrifice that makes a difference to the community in terms of slowing down the spread of COVID. So I'd also extend a thank you to all of the people in the community who have been in isolation and quarantine and done the really challenging thing that we're asking them to do. It's hard. There's just no getting around it. So we tried our best to connect people to resources, specifically in terms of if they're needing financial assistance or support getting their basic needs met. That's something we're also able to connect people to within PHHS through our intake workers. I think in the past 2 weeks, I've really been reminded of what a powerful tool contact tracing can be. When we have someone test positive, we reach out to their contacts quarantine, and then their contacts test and turn positive. That right there has slowed the spread. The people who have quarantined and then tested positives, they do not have additional contacts, and that is the power of doing the contact tracing. And we've really seen that play out in the past 2 weeks. So again, thank you to all of those who have followed the public health advice on that. We did have our first event outbreak, which the state defines as anytime there's an outbreak, they define it as a situation where 3 or more households are exposed to COVID and test positive independently. So we had, in this situation, we had 13 different cases traced back to an event. The outbreak, once it hits the level of outbreak, it does become public information with the purpose of slowing down the spread of COVID-19. It also involves the Minnesota Department of Health getting involved with us at the local health department level through the county, giving us more support in terms of intervention and providing technical assistance and outreach support to make sure that we can do our best to get things under control. So our event was a snowmobile event the last week in February up the Gunflint. We worked together with the event organizers, the Minnesota Department of Health, and any businesses that were touched by the events to encourage all staff and all attendees to test for COVID-19 regardless of symptoms. And I would have to say that everyone was very helpful and receptive to the public health intervention. It was a lot of work, but everyone really did their part. And I think that that is what's going to make a difference here. The organizers did have a preparedness plan, and in that included a registration list. So they were able to do individual outreach to all attendees and pass on the recommendation for testing. I know that given that this is considered an outbreak and a small community, there's lots of emotion tied to this. And I would just ask for the community members to treat everyone involved with kindness and respect. You know, nobody wants there to be a COVID outbreak or be tied to that, but I've been very proud to be able to work with all the different members that have been involved with the response and to have their cooperation and support. I think it really is going to make a difference by using testing and contact tracing as the tools we have within public health to really get this under control. In terms of recommendations, With our rising vaccination rate and the fact that we've been at it for over a year now, I think people are getting tired. I'm noticing that in the calls we're making, in the community in general. I think it's exciting to see so many people getting vaccinated, and people are really hoping to get back to some of the things that were parts of life that we really enjoyed pre-pandemic, in terms of seeing our loved ones, our friends, our family, getting together, having events, getting back out there in the world and experiencing some of the things that really were meaningful to us in the past. And so we did put out a release yesterday that included the news about our vaccination rate. So at this point, our vaccination rate over the weekend, it exceeded 50%, which is very exciting. We've got 51.6% of people in the county having received their first dose. That includes 93% of those 65 and older, which is fantastic. But I think it's leaving some people wondering what they should or shouldn't do given their vaccination status. So the release was really intended to be both a celebration of that achievement and also a reminder to the community of what is safe at this point in the pandemic and what they should take into account in their individual behaviors. So even people who are fully vaccinated, we are asking that they continue to wear a mask, socially distance, and stay home if they feel sick when they're in public spaces. We continue to discourage medium and large size gatherings, and that's per the CDC. The CDC also encourages people to delay all unnecessary travel. Another piece of advice is even after you receive the vaccine, we still do recommend testing for COVID-19 if you show any symptoms. And that is because even though the vaccines work very well, they're considered 95% effective, people still can get sick with COVID-19. And we would like to know about that so that we can continue to slow down the spread of things. And also so we can learn more about what causes vaccine breakthroughs. That's that 5% that is fully vaccinated and perhaps does develop COVID-19. So I would just encourage people out there listening to, if they've been vaccinated, to go ahead and test if they feel like they're getting sick. It's still a very important tool for us in public health. The other purpose of the release was just to remind the community of what we do in public health, including for events and businesses, that we are available to provide technical assistance as people look over those preparedness plans. If they're using a preparedness plan, but kind of dusting it off as they look toward the summer season. Andrea Orist, who's the statewide health improvement coordinator working out of the Sawtooth Mountain Clinic in collaboration with public health, part of her position is to be able to offer that service at no cost to the community. So aside from some of the more traditional response activities like the contact tracing, facilitating testing, the vaccination events, we still do provide that technical assistance to businesses and events. So just something we wanted to get back out there in the community as people are looking toward the summer. Finally, I know it's a big day of updates. It's been a busy couple weeks here. The last thing on the horizon I wanted to mention is that we are looking at increasing the accessibility of surveillance testing for COVID-19. And what that means is testing for people who are not symptomatic, they do not feel ill, but they may be planning to travel, or they may have children in school or student athletes. And those are very specific situations where the Minnesota Department of Education and the CDC are recommending what they call surveillance testing. So in the case of travel, testing before travel and after travel. In the case of school-age children, they are recommending testing every 2 weeks. In terms of student athletes, the recommendation is every week. And the reality is the only access we have right now is through the Vault mail-in test program. And those tests are taking quite a while to actually arrive once they're ordered. It's taking a full week for people to actually get the test kit after they order it. So that is a project that we're working on in public health, is trying to get the test kits here so that will eliminate that week-long delay for people who are looking to access those. So hopefully next time I give an update, I'll have some more progress to report on in that area. And that is all I have for today. like I said, a busy couple of weeks here.
Yeah, that's a lot. Thank you, Grace, for all your work and keeping us in the loop of what's going on, and especially thank you for working with those involved with the outbreak and getting information out just so we can be aware of what's going on. I know myself, when I hear when I saw the numbers, it made me really want to know more specifics of what was going on, and just knowing the event was enough for me to have peace of mind of like, okay, this is what's going on. It's not just widespread everywhere and we don't know. It was an event, and that just helped me process that. And I've heard similar responses from the public, and I have witnessed some shaming, and I want to just reiterate what you said, is that no one wants this to happen, and that we're trying to work together, and we don't need to crack down on anyone or anything like that. We just need to be aware of how the spread happens and what we can do to prevent it, and go from there. So thank you for handling that so well, and I'm really grateful for those that did contract it to be as cooperative and work with public health. It really makes our community a lot stronger, so thank you. Do any other commissioners have comments or questions for Grace? Commissioner Sullivan.
Yes, Grace, I was just wanting to thank you so much for trying to procure some of the vault testing. I was unaware that as an organization you could get that, and I have taken that test and ordered it online, but having it available here in the community would be a tremendous thing. So thank you for coming up with that option. That hopefully will be very helpful to Cook County.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Storley.
thank you. Good morning, Grace. I have a couple of questions and comment. I'll start with my comment first. Well, thank you, of course. That'll have to be my first for all that you're doing. I think it gives me, anyway, pause about what about summer events, especially since this was an outdoor event. And, we're all trying to just be more cautious about, well, maybe we can do a little bit more. Maybe we can do a little bit with this and that. And so I'm just kind of, thinking about, well, what kind of event would work? So that's just my comment. What do you have for information on any variants in our county?
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. That's a great question. The variant issue is still difficult for us to fully understand. We know that, so there's what they call variants of concern, and that's a variant that is either easier to pass between people, causes more severe disease, or evades protection either from the vaccine or from being infected in the past. And one variant of concern that we do have in Minnesota is what's called the B117, or sometimes it's called the UK variant. And in response to that, the state has put together, they have the ability to do genetic sequencing of positive tests to see if positive tests are the variant strain. But they only have the capacity to do that to between 5 and 10% of positive tests. And they're randomly selected. So we don't, if one of those tests is randomly selected and becomes positive for B117, they will let us know at the county. They have not let us know of any so far. And I don't know whether that's because none of our positives have been randomly selected, or if it's because they've been randomly selected and turned up negative. I'm not going to know unless they come back positive. So they did, however, in St. Louis County, receive news that they have the B117 variant spreading. The reason this variant is a variant of concern is because it does, so of those three kind of criteria I mentioned, it is more easily spread between people, about 50 to 60% more easily spread between people. And there are indications that it can lead to more severe disease. The good news, if you can say good about this, is that it does not evade the vaccine protection. So vaccination is still an important tool for B117. if I do hear that there is a positive B117 case in the community, we'll put out a media release and talk more about it. I think my approach in general is to just act as though we may have it in the community, because the way to prevent it spreading is really no different than what we would do to prevent the original strains of COVID-19 from spreading in the community. It's still the masking, the social distancing, the hand washing, staying home when you're sick. If you test, it will come positive if it's a variant strain of COVID-19. So still, we encourage testing. But at this point, it's really just kind of a stay tuned situation. I think it's similar. I mean, not to be really negative, but I do think it's a matter of time. It's not that it's going to eventually be throughout the state if it isn't already. And I think it's just a point for us to, again, reflect on what we can do and what we can do as individuals. And also if we're, business owners or individuals in charge of organizations, what that means for our preparedness planning and what we're asking of others. So that's all I have to say on the variants, but I'll definitely keep everyone posted.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I know you always do that. And my last, my question would be about the COVID card, because we all received a card that said we were going in for our first vaccine, and then on the back it says that we've received it. In light of future travel, I'm wondering, different areas of the country and other countries are asking for more proof than a card. So do you have any kind of advice, or have you been thinking about what possibly could be done through public health, or would it be up to us as an individual to get something that would definitely indicate that we've been receiving the vaccine?
That's another good question. I haven't had any requests for that so far, and I'm not sure what will eventually happen with that. I think it's probably going to be something that is on a country by country basis, what different countries are requiring. I will say, that vaccination record card, it's not the end all be all. I fully anticipate some people will lose those, and that doesn't mean that there's no record of vaccination. Minnesota does have a system called it's called MIC. It's basically, I'm trying to remember what the acronym stands for, but it's basically an immunization database. So it shows, it's something that we use for all vaccinations, not just COVID-19, but it's something that is primarily used through the clinic and often with children to see what vaccinations are due for an individual. And if someone were to move to another place, that other clinic would still have access to this immunization registry. So if that might be another way to kind of show vaccination status, would be to ask your medical provider to provide some sort of letter showing that you've received both doses of the vaccine. That's the only other tool that comes to mind for me.
Well, the only thing I did was I took a picture of it, so it's on my phone.
That's a good idea. We do recommend that to people because, like I said, I fully anticipate people have probably already lost those cards who've been vaccinated. So that is something we recommend, is just taking a picture in case.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Grace.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Don't hear any and don't see any. Thank you again, Grace, for all your work, and I hope you can get rest when you can, and we're very appreciative for how smoothly things are going, and very proud of our vaccination rate. It's very exciting. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Have a great day.
You too.
All right. We can move on to item number 5 here, human resources. We have HR Director Pamela Dixon with us on the call, and just one item here. Item A, approve the EEO/AA policy and nepotism policy. Ms. Dixon, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Good morning, commissioners, County Administrator Yorkie, colleagues, and community members. I'm going to share my screen and walk us through a PowerPoint that will provide a high-level summary of the Equal Employment Opportunity and Affirmative Action program that I'm proposing. And then I'll touch on secondarily on the nepotism policy, which is really part and parcel of the overall strategy for equal employment opportunity. So give me a moment here. And Commissioner Mills, will you let me know that you can see?
I can see it. We can see it as full screen, and it looks good.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You bet.
So the primary thrust of this proposed policy is to promote and support Cook County's values of fiscal responsibility, public service, dedication to ethics and integrity, teamwork and leadership, having an open process, and most importantly, a focus on the individual, promoting dignity and respect, which cascades into my office's guiding principles that I follow in all of the HR practices to provide service excellence using evidence-based HR programs and services, being stewards through our programs and services to promote employee growth, productivity, and performance, as well as well-being, to abide by an ethical approach using integrity, honesty, accountability, confidentiality, and objectivity to uphold our county policies and employment law, to demonstrate respect by promoting diversity, accessibility, and trustworthiness, and a focus on continuous improvement, a strategic focus, so anticipating the needs of tomorrow's workforce by using foresight, systems thinking, and stakeholder input through dialogue and feedback with employees to promote and ensure a healthy work environment, and empowerment, achievement of professional goals in alignment with department and county objectives. So why expand on our current equal employment opportunity policy to include an affirmative action program? Multiple reasons. The first being under Minnesota statute, it states that circumstances under which voluntary affirmative action is appropriate include a limited labor pool, and that can be artificially created. And so that's just saying that we have limited ourselves in terms of how we recruit and get applicants into that labor pool. And so one of the remedies for that is an extensive and focused recruiting activity and elimination of adverse impact in our selection criteria, which is informed by the uniform guidelines of employee selection procedures. And so that really is the focus of this particular policy, is on recruiting and selection of candidates. To achieve our mission as a county and to live those values by providing consistent quality service through a skilled, productive, and healthy workforce. To ensure our workforce reflects the populations of people in our county and in our region. So having an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. To mitigate and strive to eliminate bias and ensure non-discriminatory recruiting and selection practices. And to address issues at a macro level around workforce demographics, we're seeing a shift and have been for the last 10 years. We have larger population of baby boomers who are retiring, have retired, will retire in the coming 5 to 10 years. And then we have a smaller number of workers entering the workforce, primarily Generation Y and Z. So smaller population trying to replace a larger population leaving. So that's going to bring about some challenges for recruiting efforts. And this policy really acknowledges shifts in societal norms and standards in our law regarding race, gender identity, sexual orientation, and transgender people primarily. In terms of law, there was an unprecedented Supreme Court case in 2020 called Bostock and Clayton, which was really a compilation of 3 different court cases. And it determined that discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity is discrimination because sex is prohibited by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So in sum, our commitment to equal employment opportunity through affirmative, through affirmative action programming has a purpose of embracing and supporting equity, diversity, and inclusion through process and policy around recruitment and selection in order to ensure that we have access into employment opportunities and that we're able to mitigate and strive to eliminate bias in those processes and policies. Another way of looking at this in a visual that I've appreciated over time is this assumption that everybody benefits from the same support. So we had this notion of equal treatment when in fact we need to strive for equity and that making sure that everybody gets the supports that they need. And through that, we have this evolution of affirmative action. And then beyond that is really eliminating those institutional or systemic barriers. Over the past year, we've heard a lot, particularly around race and anti-racism and removing institutional barriers. There's been many community members here in Cook County who have called for that from the county. This is one way that the Human Resources Department can help move us in that direction. So how have we been working on this up to this point, and through this proposed policy, how we'll continue working on it is there was a task force that was pulled together. Myself, Allison McIntyre, the director of PHHS, Robbie Hass from our highway department, and Elena Hansen from Soil and Water. And we examined current practices and processes using a checklist from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I'll show you a sample of that. And these were areas where we could address recruitment and selection practices and approaches. We did a workforce analysis looking at our demographics. We're going to, through this proposal, continue to use tracking and reporting tools through the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, which will translate into new and expanded recruiting practices, making sure that our selection processes and tests, and when I say test in the realm of selection of applicants, it's really interviews are a test, and then job-related exams as well, or tests, same thing. And then training and implementation throughout the county with our leadership and in our employees. So here's a sample of the checklist that we used and table created with regard to recruitment practices, goals, and actions. There are pages of these around recruitment, and I'd be glad to send you the full document that we task force used. But as we look at different recruiting practices, we wanted to see, are these things that the EEOC and the Minnesota Department of Human Rights recommends, are they in place, and to what extent? And if they're not, let's create goals around that and outline or identify associated actions. So in this sample, we see focus on recruiting advertisements, saying that all advertisements for job openings state that all applicants are going to receive consideration regardless of their protected class or status. We simply, in most of the advertisements that we looked at, simply say that we are an equal employment opportunity employer. We don't explicitly state what that means with those different demographics. And so we would look to add that statement, that quoted language in all of our advertisements. Excuse me, let me go back. We want to make those goals SMART goals, right? We want it specific and measurable and time bound. So by a certain date in 2021, once I know that this proposal is approved, we can move forward and start adding some dates to those goals. Actions that are associated with that would be to update our application, create and utilize templates for advertisements that include that language, and communicate to and educate our hiring managers and supervisors around that. Second example is B, to help address underutilization through help wanted advertisements, placing those in news or social media or recruiting sites oriented toward, excuse me, women, people of color, people with disabilities, again, capturing those historically marginalized and currently protected status. Found that we weren't doing that to a great extent. So the goal would be by a certain date this year to recruit through sites oriented in that way. And then the associated action steps are listed. A sample from our selection procedures. The first one is to evaluate our selection process using adverse impact analysis to determine if our requirements screen out a disproportionate number of women, non-binary gendered individuals, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, individuals with disabilities. We have not followed that practice in the past, so our goal is 100% of positions hired during 2020. So I want to look back at a full year's worth so that we have a larger sample size and evaluate that using the 4/5 rule, which is a statistical measure, and analyze if any adverse impact exists. And then the action would be to update and utilize that calculator, adverse impact calculator, and assess practical significance results for job groups in accordance with equal employment opportunity and the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. And then to create a document with a table identifying all 2020 hires and results of that impact analysis. Second, annually review the physical and mental job requirements on our job descriptions. We are currently going through a job description review, so I've been mindful of that as we've gone through that review up to this point, and we'll continue to do that. Associated goal, 100% of physical and mental job requirements are reviewed, adjusted as needed, documented, and communicated to relevant employees and respective supervisors and department heads. Actions associated with that, scheduled dates for job description reviews, copy and paste physical and mental requirements section into forms for review and confirmation. Oops, I keep clicking when I shouldn't. And then submit changed job descriptions to personnel for review, and if necessary, the job evaluation team for reclassification. So those two samples for recruiting and selection give you an idea of the process that we used to understand where we're at with our current processes and where we want to go. A sample from tracking and reporting through the Minnesota Department of Human Rights annual reporting. You'll see up at the top here, they want us to identify total employees beginning of reporting period. So all employees that we have broken down by job group, which is in this first column here. And then looking at how many men, women, non-binary, white, people of color, excuse me, and Indigenous people. And then specifically people of color and Indigenous men, and broken out a little bit more detail with race and ethnicity across this row here, and women, and then people with disabilities. So that's the total employee population. And then we compare that to total applicants. So all applicants who were interviewed during a reporting period, same type of information. And then taking it a step further, this is where we can look at in what job groups do we have underutilization? In other words, do we have a population of people that we could recruit from, but it's not reflected in who we hire or how we hire. So there are data available through the state of Minnesota that we would be required to use. It's at a point where data has been collected up until this point in time only on women and people of color and Indigenous people. So we don't have data reflecting disability or non-binary individuals. So we would capture that information through different data collection methods on our end. We have updated our employee data sheet. So anytime we hire someone and they come into the position, part of the onboarding process is asking them to complete their address and information about them, emergency contact, but also we have an optional section where we ask them to complete demographic information to self-identify. It is optional. We don't always get everyone to complete it, but that's the data that we use for that larger report. I'll go back to identify where people fall in the county when it comes to, though, the underutilization reporting. Again, only looking at women and people of color and Indigenous people, because that's what the state of Minnesota has collected through the Department of Employment and Economic Development and the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. So those are samples of the different forms that we would use to track and then annually report through the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. It is a good faith effort, this reporting. So there's no enforcement. We're not fined if we don't achieve goals. It's more about being aware of our practices and our policies and making sure that we're able to ensure that they don't discriminate and create an adverse impact. So specifically with this policy and the affirmative action program, we're targeting recruiting and selection practices. For recruiting practices, we'll primarily focus on advertisements and outreach. Using that EEO statement of non-discrimination, looking at our underutilization, and then targeting populations through different media and different ways of recruiting, using the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development for referrals of people looking for work, as well as the Minnesota Workforce Center, Americans Job Bank. I see a second comma there, apologize for the typo, and similar government agencies. Using regional community organizations, universities, and technical schools. All universities that I'm aware of that we would recruit from have a Department of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion. And so we could tap into that department and target specific groups if we show underutilization in any of our job categories to try to increase our applicant pool. And then when able, provide on-the-job training, internships, and summer employment programs for young people and try to grow our own employees for the future. In terms of selection, we want to ensure that we have a standardized and objective process. In our application review, that's outlined in our employee handbook. We use a ranked-based method and ensure that anyone in the applicant pool meets minimum qualifications. We make sure that through our selection exams, including interviews, that they are job-related. And specifically to our interviews that we use panels, 4 to 5 members on a panel, so that we're getting different perspectives. Some of those members on the panel will be within the department that's hiring. Some will be outside of the department for a different perspective. The questions are all predetermined and aligned with the job description and are scaled in terms of responses. So if we're going to rate applicants coming in 1 through 5 on a scale, we have some meaning around what we hear from them to determine whether that's a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And then numerical and blind results. Because we have a panel of 4 to 5 members, I am moderating those panels, and I will take the results from each panel member and use an Excel spreadsheet, remove their names. So it's just interviewer 1, 2, 3, 4, and provide the total scores for each question. And then each candidate will have a total score at the end based on all 4 to 5 panel members. Using reasonable accommodation when required. So looking at individuals who have disabilities and determining how we can accommodate once on the job. One of the things in the table around selection that we did not have, but that we will put in place, is a form for employees who do state that they do have a disability and could use accommodation to help them in the performance of their job. We have not had a form in the past, but the Minnesota Department of Human Rights has a template that we will use as part of that process. Also, evaluate, again, that adverse impact analysis to determine if we're screening out a disproportionate number of Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, non-binary, and disabled applicants. Providing training to our hiring managers and our interview panel members, and then again, tracking and reporting using those examples that I showed you. So that's a high level look at that particular policy. And so I will stop if I can find my screen share. I'll end slideshow. Did that bring me back to you?
Almost.
Almost. Okay, here we go. Stop share.
Thank you.
All right.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ms. Dixon. Do any commissioners have questions? Commissioner Sullivan.
Yes, Director Dixon, I want to thank you for a very thorough explanation of the policy. And I was really curious about the Minnesota Human Rights Commission tracking and having us report data so that we can follow it. A question I had, though, as you said, there is some data and some history for Cook County on women and people of color and Indigenous people. How many years does that history go back? Do you know?
So I don't. I know that since I started here, we can go back and look at data through the Department of Employment and Economic Development through 2015. I assume there's data prior to that, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. Well, I just appreciate the fact that we can go back to 2015 and we can monitor our progress and make sure that we are following our policies. And thank you for this great work. It's very encouraging and I appreciate it so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. Any other questions from commissioners?
Chairman Mills?
Yes, Commissioner Storley.
No comment other than thank you for putting this together. It's a great report and it's something that we need to have as a policy. And I appreciate you doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. Commissioner Swalson.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I appreciate all the efforts to date, and clearly your action plans look comprehensive. And I really think the hard work is showing in what you've done to this point. I just encourage you to continue to carry it forward. We're all going to be the beneficiaries of it. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Swalson. Administrator Yorkie.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to publicly thank Pamela and the team members, Elena Hansel, Robbie Hass, and Allison McIntyre for their great work on this. This is exactly what we need to be doing. Shortly after I got here, I heard somebody joke that diversity in Cook County is when you have Norwegians and Swedes together in the same room. And that's a funny commentary on a stereotype about Minnesota, but it's not funny in terms of the way our community actually looks. Shortly after I got here also, I had a meeting with Chairman Bobby DeShaw up at Grand Portage, and he reflected on the idea that, Anishinaabe folks feel that it's not worth their time to apply for a county job because they're not really considered. And I found that surprising and disappointing to the extent that that's even a perception, let alone a reality. That's a problem, and we need to do better. And so I'm really grateful to Pamela and the team for the work they're doing to try to address that. It's what we need to do for this community, and it's the right direction for the organization. So thank you, Pamela.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'd echo all those comments as well. Clearly, a lot of work has been put into this, and I greatly appreciate that. I have received a call to action from community members a while back, and was surprised to learn of the lack of policy in the county. And our organization is developing significantly, and this is one of those developments that I'm very happy to see and want to encourage more. So thank you very much for your work, and I'm very excited for the outcomes. If there are no further comments or questions, I would look for a motion to approve this policy. Commissioner Sullivan.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the policy as written.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. We have a motion. Do we have support?
Swallowson supports.
Thank you, Commissioner Swallowson. We have a motion and support. Is there any further discussion? Hearing or seeing none, I'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Sullivan?
Aye.
Commissioner Swallowson?
Aye.
Commissioner Storley?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Mills is aye as well. We have unanimous approval. Thank you very much for your work, and thank you, commissioners, for your votes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The second policy, again, is part and parcel with the Equal Employment Opportunity and Affirmative Action policy. That is a nepotism policy. Nepotism means employment of relatives and family members. The objective of this policy is to make sure that Cook County is committed to ensuring that employment practices do not create situations such as conflict of interest or favoritism based on the employment of direct family members. Practices include hiring, promotion, and transfer. The purpose of this policy is to ensure employment practices are based on qualifications and merit and do not discriminate in favor of or in opposition to the employment of direct family members. This is a short and sweet policy, but it does cover scope as well. Due to potential or for perceived or actual conflicts, such as favoritism or personal conflicts from outside the work environment, which can be carried into the daily working relationship, Cook County will hire relatives of persons currently employed only if candidates for employment will not be working directly for or supervising a direct family member. So the crux of this policy is that direct supervisory relationship. This policy applies to all current employees and candidates for employment. Definition of direct family member is defined as one of the following: spouse or significant other, parent, step-parent or grandparent, child, stepchild, brother, and or sister. The procedure used, individuals will not be hired or promoted into a position that would create a conflict in Cook County's policy. The department head is responsible for ensuring policy compliance. If any employee after employment or change in employment becomes a direct family member, one of the affected individuals must seek a transfer or a change in the reporting relationship. Such changes must be approved by the Board of Commissioners. So that is the extent of that policy. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Dixon. Any questions from commissioners? Comments? No? Hearing none, seeing none, I would ask for a motion to approve this as well.
I make the motion to approve this as written.
Thank you, Commissioner Swanson. We have a motion. Is there support?
Sullivan?
Commissioner Hawkins.
So, apologies, Commissioner Hawkins. We've got support now. Motion support. Any further discussion? Hearing or seeing none, I'll move to a roll call vote. Commissioner Swanson?
Aye.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Aye.
Commissioner Storley?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Mills is aye as well. We have unanimous approval here as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
And it
Mr.
looks
Chair.
like-
Thank you, commissioners.
Yeah, that looks like it's your items for the agenda today, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 6 is MIS, new county website. MIS Director Rena Rogers, good morning.
Good morning, commissioners. Good morning, Mr. Chair, and the rest of all the rest of you out there. I could start listing them, but it's nice to see you all this morning. Before I start on this presentation, I just have to make my own personal comment about that policy that Pam Dixon just proposed. It's just incredible work, and so consistent with so many other efforts, conversations in the county right now. So really appreciate that. I think it really will have a lasting and a big impact on Cook County for a long time, and hopefully brings about change. So thank you, Pamela, for such thorough, as always, work that you do. So this morning, is Nick on? Hi, Nick is with me this morning, so he'll have a chance to talk about this a little bit. You may know that I think the only commissioner that was here then is maybe Commissioner Storley. About 5 years ago, we took what was a really pathetic website that you couldn't find anything on, and with no budget and an internal resource, put together the current website, which was a huge step up from what we had. That internal resource, Kirk Oberg, on my staff, he's very talented, but IT people can do the development part, but they shouldn't be the ones that sort of own the website and manage content. It's just not within our lane. And so we have been doing that. At the time that we first put out that website, there was no public information officer coordinator. There was no administrator at that time. And so there really wasn't another centralized source to kind of look at this issue. We were in the process of redoing it right before I stepped into the interim role, and then the pandemic hit. And so the website is in need of an update. It really is. Some of the content is getting old. We have new departments that have never really, like the administrative department or the HR department, that have never been fully represented on the website. And so we started looking at what were good options for that. Is there an option to not have that being taken care of within our staff, but maybe source it out? This is that option. And the particular company that we've been looking at, Revise, currently does 30%, more than 30% of the county websites in the state of Minnesota. They also do the Association of Minnesota Counties website. They're very good at it. And they not only develop the websites, but they host them as well. So over the years, we used open source tools that have their limitations. We had a small budget, about $8,500 a year, that we used for hosting costs and some other things like that. This proposal is within that budget, and it includes not only redeveloping the whole site and giving it a facelift with better tools, but the hosting over the next 5 years. So we chose in this agreement to break that out over 5 years. So it's $5,000 a year, and that pays for the initial redevelopment. It pays for a facelift and redevelopment if we choose to 4 years from now, and the hosting each year, which is it's a very incredible offer. And they will meet with our departments to help with content. They will also give us, when they'll do an original draft, and they'll give us, we got them to write in there unlimited iterations until we get it the way we want it. So there's just a lot to like here. There's all kinds of, they will ensure that our site is accessible and meets ADA requirements, which is something we've tried to do, but we've struggled to do. They will have dedicated, their software addresses that. They have a lot of other plugins that we'll be able to use in the future or currently, like public engagement applications that will allow us to do more surveying and dashboard kinds of things. So it's a lot of really good stuff here. It's, and as one of my staff said, it's kind of a no-brainer. But anyway, and the opportunity with Nick coming and joining our team, this is a great opportunity for him to become the leader of the content without us managing that technical aspect. The other thing that it has in there is a lot of content management, which means we can give departments within kind of areas the ability to update their own content and put that into a workflow so that it's approved before it's posted. There's just a lot of great tools that are going to make our website really state of the art and provide the best possible information for everybody. So the proposal today is to accept that agreement, $5,000 a year over the next 5 years. Once the 5 years is up, it drops to the regular hosting rate, which is like $2,900 a year. If at any time we want to leave this, once it's paid for, we own the site and we can migrate it to a different spot. That's what I got this morning. Nick, I'm sure you must, well, I hope you have some stuff. Didn't say everything that you were going to say.
You covered it pretty thoroughly, I think. I just would add that I'm very excited to help lead this project. And although I'll lead the content, as Rena mentioned, that's really just project management, and the content is sort of a culmination of all the expertise from all the staff members, as obviously they are the most knowledgeable in their areas. And so it'll be a great process to get to know the rest of the Cook County staff and their departments as well through this process. And so I'm really excited about it. James had said the other day how impressive the site that we've had is and has been, but websites are never-ending projects. They continually need progress and to be moving forward. And so this is just, I think, a reflection of that, and to find sort of the right vendor that is the no doubt expert in our budget that provides that 24/7 support, as this is our 24/7 contact point to the community, is just a great combination. And so very excited to take on this project and work on this in the future. So thanks, Rena.
Great. Well, thank you both very much. And do any commissioners have any questions or comments? Most of my questions were answered. Commissioner Sullivan.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to let you know, I have been looking at websites with the Airport Commission, because they're talking about, in conjunction with not only what they have on the Cook County website, doing something separate. and you are have found and agreed to an incredible contract. Looking at the value that you get for that $5,000 a year, I am just really impressed. And I've looked at several of Revise websites that they've done for different counties and also for AMC, and they do a great job with government and have a great approach to it. So thank you for your research and coming up with such a great tool to inform our community and keep everyone updated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. Any other questions or comments from commissioners?
Chairman Mills?
Commissioner Storley.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Rena. How well I do remember 5 or 6 or even 7 years ago. We were just struggling with how do we get information out to folks who want to find things, find out what's going on in different departments, find out what are the commissioners saying. And so I think this is a fabulous move, and thank you, Revise, for coming on board with us. I too have looked at other counties, and of course, we're all familiar with AMC and what a great they have for all of us to keep track of what's going on there too. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. Any other comments or questions from commissioners?
Chairman Mills?
Yeah, Commissioner Hawkins.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about how this will integrate with our minutes and agenda in iCompass, and also Kronos. Is there any overlap here? Are we going to change how we do our minutes and agendas?
Thanks for that question, Commissioner Hawkins. Kronos isn't involved in our agendas and minutes, but iCompass is. Things that can be linked in, like our GIS information, some of our payment things, e-permitting, iCompass, our agendas and minutes, those will just be linked in. They'll just be a link that's designed into the front, kind of it like it is now. So those things can be maintained. They'll be pretty seamless adding them in.
So we will still have payments to, I am assuming there's an annual contract for iCompass and e-permitting and those things. Those are separate from
Right.
this money then, correct?
Right. Those, yes,
All right.
yes. Those are applications that that we use to do a variety of other things, e-permitting specifically. And they don't have plugins for those things. They will just simply be a URL that links out to those apps, and they'll exist the way they do today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. Excellent questions. Administrator Yorkie.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Rena for her work on this, and also Nick for being part of this collaboration. When we were talking about the possibility of hiring a new public information coordinator last fall, I know there was a question about the need for having this kind of position, and Rena rightly pointed out that the setting up the structure of the website, that's something that MIS can do, but to manage content, to make sure that our pages are being updated regularly, that the content is fresh, and that there's a reason for people to keep coming back to the website, that requires somebody to own that process. And that's not something that MIS can do. And so I'm really grateful that Nick is on board. The other thing I'll mention is that on Friday, due to things that have been going on with COVID and other projects that we're working on, it was working on 4 different press releases. So in terms of whether there's a need for his position or not, I think there's clear evidence that in fact there is. So thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Administrator Yorkie. Yeah, and one of the questions that was answered in your presentation, Rena, was just about the ownership at the end of the day, at the end of the contract, rather. Do we still own our content? And yes, that is the case. So that makes me feel a lot more comfortable. And then just as a comment, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for Nick to, like he said, get involved in all the departments and really get oriented and really tie, be another tool to tie our organization together and to really coordinate all the communications that need to happen. And it's just a really good dovetail, I think, into the position. So thank you, Nick, for again joining us and being involved, and thank you, Rena, for your work in coordinating this contract. If there are no other questions or comments, I would look for a motion to approve.
Starley,
Commissioner Sullivan. Commissioner Storley, I'm sorry, I missed that.
oh, well, Starley approve.
Oh, thank you. We have a motion. Is there support?
Sullivan supports.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. Any further discussion? Hearing or seeing none, I'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Storley?
Aye.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Aye.
Commissioner Swalson?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Mills is aye as well. We have unanimous approval. Thank you very much for your work.
Thank you, commissioners.
Have a wonderful day. And we can move on now to number 7 on our agenda, Land Services. We have Land Services Director Tim Nelson with us. Good morning, Mr. Nelson.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, commissioners, Administrator Yorkie, and everyone else. This first item is a really brief and albeit housekeeping type of item. We should have actually had addressed this back when we were dealing with the other 875,000 committees and boards that had gone through in the organizational portion of the meeting at the beginning of the year. There was some residual boards. I know there was some confusion at the beginning of the year with regards to septic advisory committee, septic ordinance committee, vacation committee, rental committee, and all of this. And over the course of the years, we had actually had each of those committees. We had a vacation rental advisory committee, vacation rental ordinance committee, same with septics. But frankly, I think it's the easiest thing to just dispense of any of those particular advisory committees or those committees, because they have served their purpose and they're done at this point in time. But we do have two what are called appeals panels that are established in 2 different ordinances. We have the vacation rental appeals panel and we have the septic appeals panel. Both of which are codified in our ordinance, and so we should have adopted members for that. Now they're small boards. The first one, the septic appeals panel, is basically myself as the environmental health director, land services director. We have 1 commissioner assignment, and then the county attorney. That's for the septic appeals panel, and then for the vacation rental appeals panel is again myself. 1 commissioner, and then the county assessor. And so I just come to you to ask for 1 commissioner representative for each of those appeals panels, and then we'll abolish those any of the other committees or advisory committees or so, with the caveat understanding that our vacation rental ordinance had been drafted and adopted for a trial period of 3 years, that whole program. In the summer of 2022. So next summer, we are going to have to go back and review that whole program. We'll do a complete review and analysis of the license program, check the pros and the cons, and come back. So at that point in time, I will be coming to the board to request another vacation rental type committee to review that, but we'll wait on that until next year.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Commissioner Sullivan.
Mr. Chair, given my service on some of the other groups, the Board of Adjustment and the Planning Commission, Soil and Water, One Watershed, One Plan, it really makes a lot of sense for me to participate on that septic appeals group. So I would be happy to volunteer to serve in that fashion.
Thank you. Is that agreeable to all the commissioners?
Aye.
Yep. I see heads nodding, and I hear affirmatives. Well, that would be wonderful. And do we have a volunteer for the vacation rental appeal? Commissioner Swalson.
Yeah, I would volunteer for that assignment if that's agreeable to the rest of the.
Thank you. Yeah, Commissioner Storley, did I hear your voice as well?
I cleared my throat.
Okay. Very good. Well, Commissioner Swalson, I appreciate that, and it's agreeable to me. Is that okay with the rest of the commissioners as well?
Surely is. Thank you.
All right. Well, with that in mind, I would look for a motion to assign Commissioner Sullivan to the septic appeals and Commissioner Swalson to the vacation rental appeal committee.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. We have a motion. Is there support?
Hawkins, support.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. We have a motion and support. Any further discussion? Hearing or seeing none, I'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Storley?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Aye.
Commissioner Swalson?
Aye.
Commissioner Mills is aye as well. We have unanimous approval of the committee assignments there. Thank you, Director Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill Lane is going to be doing the other items on the agenda.
Very good. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. It's been a while since I've been before this body. We have a couple of items on our agenda this morning. One is a finalization of the review of the Cook County permitted gravel pits, and of which there are 12. Two of those are have gone into hibernation, so to speak, without any activities. And if you looked at the packet, this is a relatively formal review that is presented to the Planning Commission. It includes site visits and an assessment of the amount of mined aggregate and other mining products that are produced, and ultimately go into products, both residential, commercial, and otherwise in Cook County. For 2020, the most notable gravel pit operation was up at the George and Cheryl Humphrey pit up off of Ball Club Lake Road, which was used to produce most of the materials that will be used this summer for the Grand Portage Highway 61 readjustment. That was a huge volume. I think there was over 150,000 cubic yards of materials produced. And if you will recall, in May of last year, early June of last year, Northland Constructors, which is the contractor at the Humphrey pit, did come in with a request with the Humphreys for an interim use permit to allow aggregate washing in their pit. And that was a fairly involved process where the pit bottom is excavated, groundwater is allowed to infiltrate, and that's used to wash the aggregate to allow it to meet the technical standards for construction from Minnesota Department of Transportation. That was an interesting pit process to watch. Everything else was kind of a little more focused on the residential operations, concrete, gravel, blacktop, that sort of thing. So overall, I think this summer with KGM being back in play on Highway 61 and the bike path, which will be a nice addition from the west end, and also the Grand Portage reconstruction of Highway 61, it should be a little more aggressive as far as the activities in the pit. One thing that was noted is that Northland will be hauling most of their material from the Humphrey pit up to Grand Portage. So that's going to probably increase the amount of traffic volume. I'm not sure their route. I'm not sure if they're coming right down to 61 or not. But I can certainly check out with George and Cheryl Humphrey and see what their path is. If that poses any problems, I can at least apprise the Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners of that issue. Other than that, The reviews were all approved unanimously and forwarded to the Board of Commissioners with the request that you as well approve the review. And just a side note that the review was put into the conditions for all these gravel pit conditional use permits. So it isn't like, you know, the review is approved or denied. It's just reviewed. So that's what we are requesting you to do now, is to approve the review. As you've noted in the past, if there are issues, we have revoked a gravel permit in the past 6 years. And we also monitor what's going on an active basis. So environmentally, I think we're in good shape, and that approval of the reviews would reflect that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lane. Do we have any questions from commissioners? I don't see any, and I don't hear any. Without any questions, I would look for a motion to approve this review. Commissioner Sullivan?
Chairman Mills, I'd like to move that we accept the gravel pit operations review as presented.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. We have a motion. Is there support?
Slauson supports.
Thank you, Commissioner Slauson. We have a motion and support. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, I'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Sullivan?
Aye.
Commissioner Slauson?
Aye.
Commissioner Storley?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Mills is aye as well. Unanimous approval of the review. Thank you, Mr. Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is the request from Lutzen Limited Partnership LLC for the rezoning of a 8.9 acre parcel, which is situated just west of Lutzen Town Center and just below, for the most part, Highway 61. And this is one of those rezones which, in doing discovery and research for the Planning Commission preparation, you get into some of the history of Cook County. And this property has been in the Nelson family for likely 100 years, if not more. The original title owner was Gustav Nelson, who was one of the founders of Lutzen Resort, and the patriarch of the Nelson family as we know it today. What happened is that this has basically been an unused parcel. And if you looked at the documents that I gave in support of this presentation, it's an outlier zone. It's a situated resort commercial residential zone parcel within a residential and then the Tati zoning. So it's like an island, and it's been unused. And what we worked with the Nelson applicants is to try and get this as a residential parcel with the intent of the descendants of Gustav and George having an ability to subdivide at some point so they can have kind of a family enclave here. That's a secondary process. That's a subdivision process. And in our discussions, we saw that the rezone made sense for a couple of reasons. One is that it fits within the existing zoning landscape. And two, it doesn't impose any conflicts with adjacent property owners. And it really fits into that shoreline area west of Lutzen Town Center. And if you'll note on the zoning overlay, the entire area west of there is pretty much all resort commercial residential. So it's not like we're depriving the county of resort commercial residential zoning here. We are in fact enhancing the single family residential component, which is very important to have that diversity, especially when there's more and more subdivisions occurring and that sort of thing. This was a fairly non-contentious discussion and vote. The Planning Commission's biggest concern was basically that there is quite a bit of hydrology here, which in their concept plan, I think if you saw that in the packet, the houses are just right where we wouldn't expect them to be were this part of a studied application for land use permits or anything like that. So what we did is we separated the zoning change from what's going to happen subsequent to the zoning change. And the Nelson descendants, Rebecca Nelson Harris primarily, has indicated that they'll work with land services to make sure that wetland resources are protected and that the administrative subdivision process which follows will meet all the requirements of the zoning district and also the North Shore Management zoning criteria. So the Planning Commission voted unanimously to approve the zone from resort commercial residential to single family residential, doing so unanimously, and recommended forwarding it to the Board of Commissioners with the request that you as well approve their recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. Do any commissioners have any questions or concerns?
Chairman Mills?
Commissioner Storley.
Yes, thank you. Bill, I was looking over your survey land here, and this is not right on 61, is it? It's off on a county road?
Commissioner Storley, actually, if you look at the concept survey, or there's a survey, a rezone survey in your packet, there's a triangular piece that's above Highway 61. Most of this is south of Highway 61 and includes part of County Road 35. And in part, that confusion, and that's very astute observation, part of that confusion is the fact that when Gustav Nelson got this property in 1926 or 27, he purchased a large block of a state plat. And the state had this tendency to just subdivide without deference to road corridors and things like that. In the process of Highway 61 being improved, altered in its layout and configuration, the parcel actually has a small piece above Highway 61 that's kind of incidental to the rest of the 8.9 acres. So it's a little bit of a challenge geometrically, but from a land services perspective, it's pretty easy to accommodate as a complete parcel.
And would that above Highway 61 be buildable?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. Excellent questions. Any other questions or concerns from commissioners? Hearing or seeing none, I would ask for a motion to approve. Commissioner Sullivan?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that we approve the rezone of the 8.9 acre parcel in Lutzen.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. We have a motion. Is there support?
Storley support.
Thank you, Commissioner Storley. Any further discussion? Hearing or seeing none, I'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Sullivan?
Aye.
Commissioner Storley?
Aye.
Commissioner Swalson?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Mills is aye as well. We have unanimous approval. Thank you very much, Mr. Lane.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
The next item on the agenda is item 8 with our county attorney, Molly Hicken. I would ask that we take a 5-minute recess, though. That would bring us to 10:10. And if we can't do it in 5 minutes, we'll wait for you. But it looks like we're already at 10:11 instead. So, and then we can move on with the presentations if that's okay with everyone. All right. See you in 5. All right, that was 5 minutes. Let's see, Commissioner Storley, are you with us? Not yet. Administrator Yorkie, we do have Administrator Yorkie, okay. Just wait a minute or two here for Commissioner Storley.
I'm filling in.
Oh, Commissioner Storley is here. Thank you very much. All right, Attorney Hicken, may I turn it over to you for our item 8A mini training is the public hearings and public participation.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to give you the option here. Originally, the data practices presentation was scheduled for last week, and then we ran out of time. I'd like to move forward with that one first and then follow up with the public hearing, public participation.
Very good.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so you should see in front of you the title slide for government data practices. The general rule being that data held by county officials is by default public. The legal information presented at this session is intended for Cook County Commissioners, so others viewing this presentation are advised that information shared does not constitute legal advice for you. And you should contact your own attorney and seek out resources specific to your own situation. So government data under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, or MGDPA for short, is all data collected, created, received, maintained, or disseminated by any government entity, regardless of its physical form, storage media, or conditions of use. So this means that data, whether it is in paper form or in electronic form, or regardless of the storage media, is data. And one thing that it is not is the thoughts or opinions of government employees. So for example, if somebody uses our data practices or data request form to ask a question, it's actually not, that wouldn't fall under the obligations of the Data Practices Act. The answer would, we may choose to respond with an answer, but really the intention of this piece of law is for maintenance and provision of data, not our thoughts and opinions. So the Act creates a presumption that government data is publicly accessible. That is the general rule. And then exceptions to that rule are created by separate laws that classify data as non-public, private, or confidential. So our responsibilities as the government include that the requesting party has to be provided access no matter their reason for asking. So we don't get to say, why do you want this? What are you going to use it for? That doesn't matter. We provide them access no matter what. And access means either they can come and inspect the data in its form, or we can copy it and provide it to them at a reasonable time and place, sometimes with a fee attached upon their request. And then if we are going to deny them access to or copies of data, we need to explain why by citing law or rule, informing them that this data is classified as private, confidential, etc. So what does this mean for you as commissioners? Whenever you're creating data as part of your official duties, just consider that it's public. So as you're drafting an email, consider what it would look like if it was quoted in the newspaper, because really the general rule is whatever data you create is presumed public. Here's an example. Chapter 13 of the Minnesota statutes is the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. And it's a long and convoluted statute, which is kind of broken up into categories of data. One category of data is comprehensive law enforcement data. And this is just a section of 13.82, which defines the categories of data held by a law enforcement agency like the sheriff's office. So this is one part of law enforcement data that is public, request for service data. So this means that any requests for service to the sheriff's office, these portions of it, the nature of the request, name and address of the individual making the request, time and date of it, and the response initiated is public data. Anybody can request it for any reason. The classifications of data that Chapter 13 makes is separated into two categories depending on the subject of the data. If the subject of the data is a person or an individual, that data is either public, private, or confidential. Private means that that individual who's the subject can access it, and government employees who have a legitimate business reason or job duty can access it for that reason, but it is not, the public in general cannot access it. Data on individuals, which is confidential, cannot be accessed even by the data subject, so the person the data concerns. So an example of this would be a criminal investigation, which is active and has not yet been charged. The suspect involved is not going to be able to access that criminal investigation. Obviously, that could impede the investigation if the suspect knew what the next step was or what law enforcement already knew. And then the second category is data about like business entities, corporations, even, and these are, the statute uses slightly different language, which means kind of the same thing. In place of private, we use the label non-public, which means the corporation can access that data they are a subject of, and government employees with a job duty associated with it can access it, but it is not publicly available. And protected non-public is the phrase that we use in place of confidential. And that means even the corporation itself can't access the data. So this breaks down our obligations into 4 different categories. Under the statute, we have to, a responsible authority either is appointed by the county or is designated by statute. And we'll talk about who our responsible authorities are in a future slide. We need to keep the data in such an arrangement or condition as to make them easily accessible for convenient use. So picture our data not in a big pile, which you'd have to dig through to find, but instead separated into like bookshelves, whether they're electronic or physical, separated by category, searchable, so that when somebody requests data, we can easily figure out whether we possess it and look at it to respond to that data request. And then we need to respond as soon as reasonably possible to any public data request. That is not defined by days. If it's just a member of the public asking for data they aren't the subject of. So it's just within a reasonable time, and you figure that out just by nature of the request, the scope of that request. If it's the data subject, if a person is calling Human Services and saying, I want my child protection file, I want to know, or I want to have a copy of any reports of child maltreatment concerning my child, that is data about that subject. So they get a response within 10 days. That's defined under the statute, and it's defined in our county policy. Speaking of policies, our 4th obligation is that we have to maintain policies and procedures to provide access. So not only does the statute exist, but we also have a process by which we can be compliant with that statute. So we'll talk about our county policies, how to access them, how to view them in another slide. And obviously we have the requirement to protect data that's not public from dissemination. We have to have, as part of those policies, kind of a firewall set up so that that data cannot be inadvertently shared. A little more on responsible authorities. These individuals oversee the collection, storage, and dissemination of their data, keep and update policies for data access, and establish internal procedures to remain compliant and promptly respond to requests. So in the statute, there are certain responsible authorities who are assigned to certain data. For example, the County Welfare Agency, so that's PHHS, the director is by statute the responsible authority. So Allison McIntyre is the responsible authority of all data within her department by statute. The board chair of the Human Services Board by statute is the responsible authority for any of their data. Elected officials, elected county officials, sheriff, auditor, county attorney, etc. We, by statute, are the responsible authorities for the data in our offices. And then the county administrator gets the responsibility of being the authority for all other data that is under the county umbrella. So basically all other departments by default. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that the responsible authority is the only person who does the work of responding to data requests. They can delegate that authority to their staff. And we do that in our policy, our data practices policy. So we assign some other department heads to be responsible authority. If you violate the data practices statute, you can face consequences. And that includes consequences not just to the government entity, but also to individuals who are assigned responsibilities. That can include civil damages. So a court could order you to pay a civil penalty or financial penalty to the harmed party. Criminal penalties are actually a possibility under this statute. That would be only for willful violations of the statutes or rules adopted under the statute. It's a misdemeanor offense. And right in the statute, we have authority to issue discipline against a government employee or a county employee for willful violation of the Government Data Practices Act. All up to and including just cause for suspension or dismissal. A lot of the data that we have is not in one category, public, or the other, non-public. It's mixed up together. And this actually leads to all kinds of issues. But the general rule about that type of data is that you have to redact the non-public data before responding to your public data request. So that means sometimes sifting through hundreds of pages, making determinations as to what's public and non-public, and then redacting the data. Can be time consuming. Only if there's a public data request for data in which so much of it is non-public that it's inextricably intertwined with the public data. There's no way to like remove or redact the non-public data from the public. Only then can you decline to release. It has to create a significant financial burden and leave the remaining document with little value. This is a very narrow exception to that general rule that you have to redact and provide it. Any questions so far? So I wanted to follow up that slide with a discussion of when we can charge for providing public data. Because as you saw in the previous slide, we might end up spending a lot of time sifting through, a lot of paid employee time sifting through data and redacting. But actually, we can't charge for that time. Government entities may not charge to search for and retrieve the data. That's not, okay, this is, that bottom block is inaccurate. We can charge to search for and retrieve data. We cannot charge to separate public and not public data from each other or to redact private or confidential data about others. So the searching for and retrieving the data is often just a small amount of time. The redaction of that data is often what takes the most amount of time. That's what we can't charge for. We can't charge somebody to come into the courthouse and inspect data. We can charge a fee for copies, but that's limited to the actual cost for subjects of the data. So our ability to recover costs for responding to data requests is actually quite limited. It's also defined in our county policies for data practices. So I'm going to show you how to access those. We have two data practices policies. One is for members of the public, just making general data requests. The other is for data subjects, so people who are requesting data about them. They're slightly different from each other. One of the differences is that timeline that we talked about before. When somebody's asking for data about themselves, they are entitled to a response within 10 days. If it's just a member of the public requesting general data, they get that response within a reasonable time. But the practices or the policies do outline how to make a data request and how we respond, and they assign the responsible authorities, and then finally assign the allowable fees that we can charge. And you'll find these data practices policies on our public website. They are required by law that we have these in place. Here are some other relevant policies that you might want to review, which relate to data and our handling of data. There's the internet and email acceptable use policy, the social media policy, the communications policy, and then this last one is criminal justice information, email and data sharing policy. This policy is really specific to criminal justice information that's not accessible to commissioners, but just be aware that that policy is required by law and applies to many of your county employees. And where to access these policies, these are all in the human resources part of the intranet. So they're available to, they're most easily available to county employees and officials. This is how we handle data requests. Now, we cannot require that somebody fill out this form. We can't even require that they put their request in writing under the statute, but we can certainly request that they use this form or put their data in or their request into writing. I always ask that because I think it's helpful to have a request in writing for a few reasons. The person asking for that data, when they sit down to write down the request, has to think about exactly what they want and, you know, define that. Depending on what their purpose for asking for the data is, it might be more narrowly defined if they sit down and think about it than it would be if they're just making a phone call and making a request off the top of their head. It also, putting it in writing also reduces the chance that we might misinterpret their request and, you know, give them the wrong data that they didn't intend on asking for, or maybe waste a bunch of time searching down something that they didn't really want. And finally, a form like this or a request in writing is going to collect their contact data so that we ensure we have the right place to respond to, and we can call them with follow-up questions, that kind of thing. So this is just a snapshot of the form that is on our public county website. If you go to the How Do I menu, you can select data request, and that's how you get to this form. And then this is also, you can see that there is a link here to both of our data practices policies. Best practices for you to consider and follow are if you get an email asking for county data, it's kind of in the form of a public data request, forward it to the appropriate responsible authority as defined in that policy. If you don't know who that is, you can email it to me and I can get it to them. Tell the requesting party to, or, you know, direct them towards the county's policies if they have any questions, or, you know, if they want to know what this will cost. Refer them to the online public data request form. Show them how to use it. Again, don't require, just to request that they use it. And then the third, and I think one of the most important best practices, is to be aware that you are creating government data whenever you're working in the capacity of a commissioner. And you have an obligation to maintain that data in kind of an organized way, and secure it if it's not public data. This is a recommendation that I have for you related to data practices, and it concerns your email. You're provided with county email addresses, and I highly recommend that you use those email addresses and those servers for your correspondence that have with constituents whenever you're acting as a commissioner. If they do email you in a personal email account, or like if you're separately employed and it's your other work email, best practice would be to forward their email to your work account and then respond from your work account. That helps us. If we get a data request and it's for kind of a large scope of data, we are able to more easily search your county Outlook account and adequately respond to that data. If your correspondence is scattered between county email and your other work email and your personal email, you're really opening up the possibility that we'd have to go on some phishing expedition through all those accounts, and you don't want that. You want to be able to easily separate your personal correspondence from your official county business. And there's also this public perception problem. When you are not using your official means to correspond and communicate, you could be seen as, trying to keep something secret or out of the public eye. This is the Hillary Clinton problem, I guess, with, using the private servers for emails. Not that that was intentional, but you don't want to create that perception that you're trying to keep something separate and secret. If a commissioner was to use their other employer's email, and I don't think this is the situation with any current commissioners, but that employer may have their own policies, like they're able to search your email, they're able to terminate your email account, at will. And that could really cause us a problem if you're using that email for county business. So just be aware that government data is data no matter where it is, which email account it's in. And then I talk a little bit about the Official Records Act here. It's basically the same concern. You could have data that's important for the county to maintain on a server that the county does not have control over, and that causes issues. Here are some resources. I listed all of the policies that we talked about. These are all available either on the county website or on the county intranet, which is available to you as commissioners. The Minnesota Data Practices Office is a resource. Really good. They have a bunch of they have an opinion library. MCIT has got a bunch of good stuff on data practices. And then I encourage you to someday just search for Chapter 13 of the Minnesota statutes in the Minnesota Reviser website and scroll through all the types of data, just so you're generally aware. All right. Any questions on data practices? Super exciting stuff. But I always want to, I want to do this presentation towards the beginning of the year, because you're immediately, like as soon as you are sworn in, you're inundated with data and creating data all over the place. So it's good that you know what your obligations are. And feel free to ask me questions as always.
Thank you, Attorney Hicken.
Calling.
Yeah,
now I have another.
I was going to say that the biggest takeaway, or most, let's see here, the most practical takeaway for me, and just my my experience as a new commissioner, was just forwarding everything to my county account and using that primarily for county business, and really making that separation. I think that's probably the most useful. And then also just being aware that everything we write or type or send is public. So just be aware of that. Even any recorded meetings, all that. So I don't think we need to worry about that, but we just need to be aware of that. And it's important for transparency and accountability. So as long as we're using best practices, I think we're in a much better place, and I appreciate you helping us through that and bringing awareness to that. Are there any immediate questions or concerns for Attorney Hicken on this presentation? Doesn't look like it. All right. I'll mute again.
Thank you. All right, so I was given permission to cover another couple topics here since we have time. And so I'd also like to talk today about public hearings and about public participation at meetings. So let's start with public hearings. A public hearing is a little different than just a regular meeting, or different from the rest of the meeting. Often we're holding public hearings in the middle of a otherwise standard meeting. The public hearing is a specific kind of meeting that's designed to gather information or to survey citizen opinion regarding a certain proposed government action or maybe an application that's before a government body. A little different than your regular meeting, because at these meetings, citizens are encouraged to speak and are encouraged to offer evidence to the board, whereas that opportunity, as we'll talk about later, is a bit limited in the rest of the meeting. Sometimes the public hearing is required by statute. So in the statute that authorizes a certain action by the board, it also requires a public hearing. And sometimes public hearings involve constitutional considerations of procedural due process. We'll talk about that. A public hearing is required in a bunch of different situations. This non-exclusive list covers most of what you'll see. So public hearings include truth in taxation, applications for CUPs and IUPs, land use variance applications, establishment or amendment of zoning ordinances. Actually, the establishment of any ordinance is going to require a public hearing, and the amendment of any ordinance is going to require a public hearing. And then you need a public hearing prior to adopting or amending any comprehensive plan or official control. Official control, that includes legislatively defined and enacted policies, standards, precise detailed maps that control like the physical development of a municipality or a county. You're required to notice a public hearing a little differently than a regular meeting. You need to publish it, the time, location, and purpose at least 10 days prior to the public hearing. It's got to be published in your county's official newspaper. This second part doesn't really apply to us, but in a bigger jurisdiction it might. The county's official newspaper and in the newspaper in general circulation in the town or municipality or area of concern. We don't really have any specific newspapers like for Lutzen or for Grand Portage. And there also might be additional notice requirements in the statute for different actions that you have to include in the content of that notice. But these are the basics. Your bylaws that the county board first passed in 2020 define the procedure or the order of business for a public hearing. So you'll find these in, I think it's section 4, Roman numeral 4, letter H. So first, your presiding officer opens the hearing, states the purpose, and then you usually have county staff, or maybe, you know, there's somebody from the state or somebody from a consultant there who is going to provide information to the board. If it's an application like let's say you have an application for a conditional use permit in front of the zoning commission, the planning commission, then that person who is putting forth the application would then make a presentation. Then you invite the general public to come forward, present their opinions, their evidence, you know, their testimony. It's basically an open discussion for those members of the general public. Then the county board gets to share their thoughts with one another, discuss, ask questions. Then the chair closes the public hearing, and then the county board makes the decision. So the public hearing is your opportunity to gather up all the information you can, put all the relevant information on the record, and then you close it and you use that record to make your decision. Any questions about that? This is also included in your bylaws, and this is consistent with statute and with the Constitution, the First Amendment. You can alter the procedure of your public hearing as needed to assure orderly, fair, and expeditious hearings. The rules that you create are really with the goal of creating an orderly discussion, giving everybody a chance to be heard. And I like this. It's interesting to ensure no individual is embarrassed by exercising the right to free speech. You do put in your bylaws that those testifying at the hearing shall use the microphone, give their name and address. And that's really for that overall goal of a public hearing, which is creating a record by which you can defend your decision. And you also ask that members of the public who want to be heard sign in and make it known that they want to speak. That's the way everyone gets their chance to speak. So the First Amendment is always a consideration in public hearings. It's your ability to regulate people's speech depends on the type of forum that you create, and a public hearing is generally considered, it's called a limited public forum, which means it's limited to a use by a certain group or dedicated solely to the discussion of certain subjects. So in that type of a forum, you have a greater ability to place restrictions on the use of speech. So that means that these restrictions, like imposing a time limit or requiring that the speakers limit their speech to the subject matter of the public hearing, those are constitutional restrictions on speech, so long as they remain content neutral, right? So you can't determine that people on one side of an issue get different treatment than people on the other. Speaking of the Constitution, here's another part of the Constitution, which is that procedural due process is afforded to people whenever they have a property interest at stake. So this includes some public hearings, but not all. Wherever somebody's property right is at stake, this is a lot of the things that the Planning Commission addresses. Okay, applications for conditional use permits and interim use permits. involve somebody's property interest. A property interest just means like they can, they're allowed to make money off of their property, or this application might affect the value of their property for resale. And in these situations, you are required to create an environment that is kind of similar to a judicial proceeding, but they call it a quasi-judicial proceeding. It's something less than what you might see in our courtroom, but still includes the basic rights of procedural due process. Practically speaking, the difference usually is that that person, it usually happens before your public hearing ever happens, that they have received notice that includes informing them of their right to appeal. That's the main difference in most of these situations. So some of the types, I think variances are also something that requires this quasi-judicial proceeding. Subdivision plats, zoning code violations, when you're considering those, and a site plan review. Quasi-judicial proceeding does not include the ability to cross-examine. So if the applicant wants to ask questions or, examine the other people who are testifying, you can inform them that that is not their right. The other important part that you should consider for procedural due process is that you, as a decision maker in these types of hearings, need to remain neutral and impartial. In other words, you don't come to that hearing having already made your decision. You've got to listen to the evidence with an open mind, and you have to make your decision based on the information provided to the board during the application or hearing process. So make your decision based on the record in that public hearing. If something relevant to your decision has been left out of the record, you can add it to the record before that public hearing closes. For example, if you received an email with a lot of helpful content to the decision makers, you can present that email during the public hearing and make sure it's part of the record. If you made a phone call to a state official and learned some information on which you're going to base your decision, make sure you speak about that phone call and about that information while you're in the public hearing. Make sure it's part of that official record so that it supports your vote, your decision. But if you come having prejudged that issue and you are determined to not have been a neutral and impartial decision maker, that's a reason for a court to overturn the decision of the board. So it's important that you do that. I recommend you not make promises to constituents about how you're going to vote when somebody's property rights are at issue. Because that means that's evidence that you're not a neutral decision maker.
Attorney Hicken?
Yeah.
And I just want to point out these are really good points for public hearings, and then also just for our board meetings, our regular board meetings, any of our decisions. It's really helpful, I think, for the public and for each other to understand where we're coming from. And to of course, it's on our judgment to decide when it is and is not necessary to make a comment on some of our decisions. But the more we can shed light on why we're deciding something a certain way, it really helps the public understand our process, and it helps each other understand where we're all coming from. And it may not be as necessary as in a public hearing because it is different, but I just wanted to point that out, that I think it's a really helpful tool for transparency, again, accountability, and board development. So thank you.
And this doesn't mean that you can't come into a hearing with opinions on certain things. We all have our own background and opinions for everything, but just be open to changing your mind at the hearing. Just to stress how important it is to have a strong record, you should know that if the county board's decision is challenged in court, these are the factors that the court looks at. What is the process for the application or hearing? What was the evidence before the board when it made its decisions? And what were the findings made by the board? Do they kind of fit, or are they supported by enough objective evidence? And obviously the objective evidence that the court gets to look at is what's in the record. So that's why I emphasize that. If the evidence supporting the board's decision is found insufficient, the court may overturn your decision. Here are some best practices. Whenever you have an applicant for a certain right, like a CUP, involved, make sure that they have a chance to inspect documents and present evidence, fully present their case. Make a record, I've already said that, which is the basis. So include documents, maps, photographs, whatever is pertinent to your decision in that record. And listen to the public sentiment and opposition. You know, sometimes in our most controversial issues in front of the board, you'll get a big crowd and, you know, a lot of emotion in the room, sometimes anger. You know, you want to listen to that public sentiment, but you also don't want to give it undue weight. You want to make sure that you are balancing public sentiment against the actual evidence, the objective facts in front of the board. You have a responsibility to make decisions based on those facts and not just on the weight of public opinion. I think that's kind of, I would imagine that's kind of hard to keep in mind sometimes with our most controversial subjects. I'm going to move on to public participation in meetings. I just have a few more slides here. This has been a subject of a lot of discussion of previous boards. I'm grateful that we now have some rules of procedure in place that help define for the public what's expected if they wish to participate in a board meeting. But, you know, in general, we do limit public participation in regular board meetings, not because we want to muzzle people, but because you have a goal of getting county business done at those meetings. And there's a lot of it, right? So the chair has to have the ability to control progress through those issues and make sure everything that needs to be addressed that day is addressed. The part of the bylaws you're looking at, there's a couple of different parts, but Roman numeral 4, letter I is where some of this is included. And the introductory paragraph states it pretty clearly that the public is invited and encouraged to attend and to participate in county board meetings. And then what follows is the methods of participation. If a member of the public wants to have an agenda item, they need to go through county administration. And sometimes, and I think most times, county administration would delegate dealing with the member of the public to a department head or staff member. One moment. And then the staff member who's kind of assigned to deal with this issue, they can make an effort to resolve it under their own authority and procedures. If they can't do that and it requires a decision of the county board, then that department head or staff member or the county administrator would then add the issue to the agenda. So this process really allows the board to complete its business in an efficient and orderly manner. If the issue rises and to keep issues that don't really need to be heard before the board outside of board meetings. I think a lot of times people just don't know how government works, and they know who their elected commissioner is and they want to speak to that person or to the board, when really there's a process outside of the county board to deal with their problem or issue, and they just need to be redirected and then their problem is taken care of. But this process does allow it to get onto the agenda where the county board's decision is required. And then the other method to participate in a meeting is the public comment session of the board. And so this is what's in your bylaws. It's always on the agenda. Whoops. It's always on the agenda. Actually, this is what it says in your bylaws. I didn't remember it this way, but it does say the maximum length of time for an item to be presented in this session is 5 minutes. I think in the past, the chair has sometimes made allowances for a longer presentation if there are only a few people there, or a shorter presentation if there are a lot of people who wish to be heard. We do ask that if somebody is bringing documents or a presentation forward that is reduced to tangible form, like this slideshow or a handout, that they provide that to county administration the week before so it can make it into the board packet. That doesn't always happen, and that's fine. If somebody just brings it to the county board, they're asked to bring copies. And when we're meeting in person, we have asked staff to make copies for them, but that's just so that members of the public who are in the board meeting can see it, as well as commissioners and anyone else at the table who needs to see. The other part of your bylaws that addresses public participation sets up some guidelines for people who are addressing the board, and that's in section Roman numeral X, letter C, where we set out guidelines for people. What can they expect when they present? Again, they're asked to talk into the microphone. That's so that everyone can hear them, and also so that it becomes part of the record. Especially, I think, when we're streaming these meetings publicly and a lot of people access the meeting that way, it's important to ask people to approach the microphone to speak clearly into it. People are asked to limit their comments to the time allowed and to things on the agenda, although they don't need to. They can address any subject, really. But they're requested to confine comments to matters of county business. There shall be no demonstrations during or at the conclusion of any speaker's presentation. And I think what this is addressing is when people wish to boo or to clap for other presenters. Remember that part of when we were talking about public hearings, and the board has a goal of not embarrassing people who wish to express their First Amendment right or to express their opinions under the First Amendment. When there is like a crowd reaction or a crowd response to people's comments, that may, and let's say it's a negative reaction, that may affect whether they choose to continue to speak, whether they ever come back to the board to speak. You're really trying to create an environment that's welcoming to everyone, and that doesn't create favor for one person's opinion over another. And that's really, I think it can be hard to understand for people who haven't thought about this before, why the county board wouldn't want you to clap for somebody. But that's I think that's the general reason behind it. You don't want to favor anyone's opinion over another. You don't want to create an environment where the most popular opinion is most likely to be heard, if that makes sense. Any questions about this? These are just the be nice rules, and a couple others, but people who come to our meetings are asked not to get nasty. Don't use obscenities, don't insult people, refrain from personal attacks. Obviously, refrain from threats of violence. People are asked to keep their comments to matters of county business. And this first bullet point, I want to talk about a little bit. It happens a lot where people in public comment ask questions of commissioners, and they kind of attempt to start a conversation. There are a lot of good reasons for actually not engaging in conversation with a member of the public during public comment. Unless it's for like a limited purpose of, giving a detail about scheduling. That meeting is scheduled for this day, or some administrative detail. But this not engaging in conversation with somebody in public comment really allows the chair to maintain control over the meeting so that you can get your business done. It reserves the time for that person being heard, the member of the public being heard, instead of a commissioner's response or a commissioner's opinion in response to a question. That time is really reserved for the public to speak. And sometimes there are, you're presented with a gotcha type question during public comment. Maybe you're not prepared to make a decision that is required by that question, or you don't have the background. And so it really puts you at risk when you're answering that question to make a record about a decision that you're not prepared to make. And I wanted to ask Commissioner Mills or anyone else on the board with experience with this, if you have any suggestions for commissioners and how to respond if you're asked a question directly by a member of the public during public comment. I've seen it done very artfully.
Molly?
Yeah, Commissioner Starley, please.
Thank you. Well, Molly, I don't know how efficient one can be, but I just wanted to reiterate the fact that the chair sets the mood for the meeting, and you lay it all out. You will have 5 minutes, no obscenity, profanity, no clapping. You just set it all out before the meeting so that they know clearly. And then we have a gavel, and you just wrap that gavel and you say, I want to remind you, please. So, you try to be upfront with the guidelines, and I'm not even going to say nice. You need to be efficient in running this. So my experience of my being chair has found that that when you are clear, it's respected. And when someone starts asking Commissioner a question, the best way to say is, thank you for your question. If you want to direct it to your commissioner, otherwise we'll try to get back to you, and leave it at that.
Thank you, Commissioner Starley. Yeah, and of course, my time as a commissioner has been quite limited, and COVID certainly has played a role, in my belief, in public participation here. But I think if we put ourselves at risk, then we also put the board at risk, and we can put the organization at risk. And so I try to minimize any risks that I bring or engage with. And I think, it sounds fairly lame, but having the boilerplate response of this is a time for public comment, and we can certainly direct any questions you might have to the appropriate staff member, and then get back to you, just like Commissioner Starley said. So, but there have been times where there's very simple answers that commissioners have responded to, and that's just going to be in each commissioner's best judgment there. But if we do have policies and recommendations in place, I think that puts us in a much more standardized and safer place for the organization as a whole. So, but I think well, the bylaws are new for one thing, but there hasn't always been consistency in how public comment has been dealt with, and with whether or not commissioners engage during that time. And so it's just informing people, like just like Commissioner Storley said, this is what the time is for, and this is maybe the best way to get a response. And I try to remind people that our meetings are largely about taking care of business, right? And if you want to have a conversation, then that might be better done outside of the boardroom. But we certainly can do the formalities in the boardroom as well. It's just maybe not quite as productive when it comes to conversing with the public. So trying to remind people of that too is kind of been one of my strategies.
I do have another question. So I guess I just need a better understanding. When Mr. or Mrs. Public comes before us without an item on the agenda, they just come and they say, I'm concerned about this in the community. We accept that too. They don't have to go through department head or the administrator for that. But when the item is on the agenda, is that when they do the procedure? But so what is the procedure actually, Molly?
So if a member of the public wants to address an item that's already on the agenda, the public comment period at the beginning of the meeting is when they can address that.
Right.
If somebody presents, let's say they haven't, they want to talk about something that's not on the agenda. One way that commissioners have addressed that is not by responding in public comment, but maybe addressing it during commissioner concerns or some other part of the meeting where they can bring up miscellaneous topics. If you're ready to address it. If it's a brand new novel issue and you don't know where to take it, that might be a scenario where you just offer to contact the constituent at another time to learn more about.
Yeah, I think we have at the end of a meeting, we've said the public comment this morning was thus and so. Does anyone have anything to add to that? Because that then gets back to that person to say, you know, they are going to respect my concern about something. And then we just take it from there. So it goes both ways, that we heard them, we're not sure where to go with it, but we will address it at some point, and they know that that'll take place then.
When we're meeting in person, sometimes if this scenario happens where somebody brings something up and let's say a member of the staff or who's in the room or the county administrator or even myself knows something about that situation, at the end of public comment, we might step away from the dais and just, you know, suggest to that person that they call so-and-so or that they take a look at this on the website for more information. That's a way to respond that doesn't disrupt the agenda any further. And that, you know, gives the person a direction to go in. I can see where it might be frustrating to come and you know, make an impassioned plea and just face a bunch of blank faces. So, you know, we have to look at every situation individually and come up with the appropriate way to handle it. But the general rule is don't engage in conversation or debate during public comment.
Yeah, and I would say it's also very frustrating as a commissioner sticking to that because you do want to answer questions, you do want to get information out there, you do want to respond, and it almost seems disrespectful to not do it immediately, but it really is about having good process in place and to keep things orderly and to take care of business, and we absolutely want to receive public comments as much as possible, but then just responding in an orderly and thorough fashion. So I'll encourage everyone if and when that comes up, and we'll go from there, eh?
Sounds great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes my presentations. Any other questions?
Commissioner Hawkins.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that last part again. So I'm wondering if an individual comes to public comment with something on the agenda that will be voted on. Now, I certainly would hope that person would contact their commissioner to let them know the concerns before meeting day. But let's say maybe there was some new information presented at public comment. Sometimes I felt like I would like to just clarify with that person. Is it okay for me as a commissioner to ask questions of that presenter? I'm just wondering that.
Well, you are within your rights, absolutely. The question really is what is the best procedure? And if there's information, as you say, that's new information, I think it's important for us to have as much information as we can. And so you're going to have to use your best judgment there. But maybe worst case scenario is we table the issue if we need to find more information out. But generally, I would say we have a lot of information ahead of time. I don't think it's possible to have all information all the time, but in most cases, I think that wouldn't happen. But if it does, we could table it, or you could ask questions. But it's just important to know that public comment period is for the public to give the information and for us to receive that. But questions of clarification, I think, are important. So we're clearly in the gray area, right, of what we should and should not do, and so that's often just a judgment call on our part. So
I'd like to add that sometimes there is an agenda item that is of great importance or concern to a specific member of the public, or that member of the public has a lot of information that the board might wish to consider. It is the chair's right to recognize other people in the room, and I think that and invite them to partake in that discussion or to answer questions during the agenda item. And I'm trying to think of I can't come up with an example of this, but I know that it's happened in the past where, an individual commissioner saw somebody in the room and wanted to call on that person to add some information to the discussion. I think if somebody will be in the room, it would be a good idea to give the chair a heads up and say, I'm going to ask you to recognize this person and have them add to the presentation. Sometimes when that request comes at the last minute, I think it's hard for the chair to deal with, to make that decision, taking into consideration the time allotted for the agenda item and, not having a heads up on it. But it's certainly the chair can recognize somebody else to speak. A department head might say, oh, I see somebody is in the room from the city of Grand Marais. Maybe they can talk about how the council dealt with this issue. And ask the chair to recognize that person. But you want the chair to have control of the meeting. I think Commissioner Storley made a good point that their tone sets the whole environment for whether it will be productive or not. The department head might.
Well, thank you, Attorney Hicken. Do we have any other questions? Commissioner Hawkins, does that answer your question, or is that just kind of, okay, yeah. And maybe, Attorney Hicken said it much better than what I was trying to get at, is that public comment is for the public, right, for them to express themselves. And then, yes, if it is an agenda item, I think that's a really good point, that there can be maybe further discussion at the chair's discretion. Maybe based off the public comment, but when it comes time for that agenda item. Any other? So, thank you, Mr. Nelson, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just been kind of observing in the background with regards to the discussion. And certainly there's a lot of that interaction between the public hearings that happen with the Planning Commission and those in front of the Board of Commissioners. And we had run into a problem some years ago where there was a practice that the Planning Commission conducts the public hearings and takes all of the public comment. It becomes part of that public record. And there was a time where the commissioners would then open it up and almost run a second public hearing at the commissioners meeting and accept more additional testimony and such, which kind of disrupts that actual public hearing flow. The Planning Commission is delegated to run that public hearing, and the Planning Commission recommendations come based off of that public comment that is made at the public hearings. And so I had people literally telling me to my face, I don't bother going to the Planning Commission or participating because I know I can just go right to the commissioners and bypass the Planning Commission. So yes, I absolutely 100% agree that the public comment can be made at the public comment periods of the planning or the Board of Commissioners. But if it does impact decisions that are made with the Board of Commissioners at that point, I would just request that there would be that kind of tabling or send if it's additional information or information that would impact the possible decision or recommendation from the Planning Commission, that the item would be tabled and sent back to the Planning Commission for further contemplation and deliberation.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. That's a really good point. Does that make sense to everybody? That yeah, we have the process in place, and we don't want to circumvent that. And so yeah, that is a hopefully unique situation that doesn't happen. A large, in my opinion, a large part of this has to do with just communicating with the public what our process is and having that defined. And that's one reason why I think the bylaws are so important to have, is so that everyone can know how things work and what, and hopefully why as well. Yeah, establishing that and since it's new, right, we have to communicate that and then also stick to it. So that is our charge. Any other questions for Attorney Hicken regarding either data practices or public hearings? Doesn't look like it. Thank you very much, Attorney Hicken. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. And the next mini training will be in April, and that's going to be on treaties and tribal sovereignty.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Looks like we can move on then to item number 9, Auditor Powers. Do you have anything? It doesn't look like on the agenda. Anything you needed to add?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have nothing to add today.
Excellent. Thank you very much for being here. Item number 10, Administrator. 10A, Administrator Updates. Administrator Yorkie.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning again, Commissioners. Just a few things for you this morning. Following up on last week's Committee of the Whole meeting, at which I presented some information about county buildings and funding, I did present some recommendations at the end of that presentation, and just wanted to give you an update on efforts to follow up on those recommendations. As noted further down on the agenda, we have scheduled a building tour for the commissioners. That will be Thursday, April 8th, and we'll be looking at all of the county's major buildings, and I hope that all of you can attend that. I think you're going to find it very informative. And even if you've been through county buildings before, you probably have not seen them like you're going to see them on April 8th. So looking forward to having that tour and the conversation around our buildings. There's really a lot to talk about and a lot to explore. So that's one thing. Also wanted to let you know that I have followed up with the City of Grand Marais Sustainability Program to submit a consent to provide utility information to have the sustainability program start benchmarking energy use in our buildings. That's a really important step in kind of figuring out how we're using energy and identifying places where maybe we're not using it as efficiently as we should be, and perhaps taking corrective action to address those inefficiencies. Another thing that we've begun following up on, we talked about the importance of being able to track our assets, building equipment in terms of age and replacement schedules and that sort of thing. We've started having internal discussions about the best way to do that. There are a number of off-the-shelf solutions that we could use to begin doing that kind of asset management. There may also be an opportunity to design an app in-house that would enable us to do that using a platform that we're already using. But we're just beginning that conversation, so I can't really tell you where that's going to go, other than we are exploring it. And I see it as a really important step in beginning to get a better handle on our systems and how to take care of them in the best way. So that's it on the building side. I guess one more thing related to buildings. So I know the newer commissioners had the opportunity to tour the Cook County Recycling Center a month or so ago. And part of that tour indicated that we do have the loading dock area where we have trailers being unloaded and materials processed. And that area currently is uninsulated and unconditioned. So in the winter, when it's 20 below outside, it's 20 below in the loading area. And that's really, and then in the summer too, I mean, even when it's relatively comfortable outside, that area gets really hot. And so we have our staff who are processing those materials working in some really unpleasant conditions. And so we have sought bids to have some insulation put in. And part of that work would also involve a structural modification to the building to allow forklifts to go from the west processing area into the loading dock area. And we are looking to get updated bids to have that work done. I think when I presented last week, I talked about the possibility of, possibly looking at getting, exploring a new recycling center. And that's a question that's kind of off in the distance. The issue of the working conditions at the current facility are kind of more acute. And so I think regardless of how we move forward, we probably need to get this project done. So I just wanted to give you a heads up that I'll be coming forward with information about the cost of insulating that area and also making sure the space is conditioned so that it's reasonable conditions for our staff to be working in. Another thing I wanted to bring to your attention, Governor Walz on March 15th issued an executive order that modifies the recommendation for remote work. Up until now, it has been a requirement that workers who can work from home or remotely do so. And that, in light of more folks getting vaccinated and conditions changing, that is being changed from a requirement to a strong recommendation. And I just wanted to note that because I think it has implications for how we look at our path forward out of the pandemic. We are currently still having all staff who can do so work remotely. And again, we have found through experience that's working pretty well. But as we get more people vaccinated, we are going to resume to some degree having people work in the office. I've talked before about my expectation that, even after the pandemic is over, we'll be using remote working as a way of operating. And I think there are a number of benefits that would come from retaining that policy, both in terms of giving staff flexibility to not have to drive to get to work, which for our folks who live up the Gunflint or don't live in Grand Marais, that's quite a benefit not to have to drive. It also has potential major cost implications for us as we explore a capital improvement program and what that's going to look like. Our space needs are obviously directly related to how many staff we have and how frequently they're working in the office. So to me, that presents an opportunity for potentially some major cost savings as we look at what our building needs are going to be in the future. So in terms of how we are going to navigate our path forward in terms of having people come back to work, I think the outbreak that happened over the last couple of weeks has shown that we are not out of the woods yet and that we still need to be vigilant. And so I'm not suggesting that we rush ahead in trying to bring people back into offices. I think there's still a lot of value in having people continue to work remotely. But again, as more people become vaccinated, that's going to be, it's going to be more of an option to have people come back to the office. And there are certainly benefits that go along with having people working in the same space in terms of collaboration and information sharing. And so, we'll be talking with the department directors at next month's management advisory team about where people are in terms of their expectations and thoughts about bringing staff back to work. I should also note there's an article in the Star Tribune about a week and a half ago about the Target Corporation's plan to downsize its office space in downtown Minneapolis by about a third. This is something that I think you're going to hear a lot more about from various companies as we move forward. And they also, as part of that, they had planned to have their staff start coming back in June, and that return has now been delayed till fall. So again, a lot of variables to consider. I am advising caution in moving forward. We want to do this in a smart way that takes into account both the needs of county government operations, but also the health of our staff. So I'll be sharing more information in coming weeks and months about how those conversations are going internally and proposing a plan for transitioning back to normal, whatever that is. So that is that. And then the last thing, you've heard some conversation from the sheriff recently about the need for a dog pound with the city of Grand Marais getting rid of its animal shelter. We have a need for a facility to house animals that the sheriff's office picks up. And so we're having internal conversations about that. There may be an opportunity to use county tax forfeited properties for locating that kind of facility. And that's something that we're looking into. And as we have more information about that, the sheriff or I will bring that forward. So I know that's something that a lot of folks in the community are interested in, and it is a need. So we are focused on that. And that is all that I have for now. So I'll entertain any questions.
Thank you, Administrator Yorkey. Do any commissioners have questions or comments? All right. Well, I'm very excited to hear about the first steps in the capital improvements, and yeah, I look forward to hearing suggestions around the recycle center. Yeah, I recognize the immediate need, and I sure would like to try to incorporate the longer term needs there, but we'll see what recommendations come forward here. Mm-hmm. All right. Otherwise, we can move on to item 11, employee concerns, commissioner concerns. Anyone have any reports they'd like to share? Commissioner Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to update everyone that at the last EDA meeting, we had a vacancy on the Finance Committee, and so I've agreed to serve in that capacity. And so we have been meeting quite regularly to determine who might receive the taconite relief grants that have been offered by the IRRB. So we're in the process of, we've put together a rubric and gone through all of the materials, but it's a great process, and so we're moving forward on that. And then the Planning Commission had a public meeting on the 17th to propose those changes to the ordinances. And I just want to thank Director Nelson for a great job of accepting public input and all the good discussion, clarifying concerns and issues prior to recommendation to our county board about those ordinance amendments. And then lastly, the Airport Commission has been meeting, and I know they had an opportunity to have a couple of their members meet with April Zimmer to update and get their agendas and their minutes on the county webpage. So that's really exciting. They did that yesterday, and are looking forward to having a presentation done by Attorney Hicken for them on open meeting law, and that will be coming up at their next meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. Any other reports Commissioner would like to share? Or concerns or anything? Not seeing any or hearing any. I do have, I guess, one item. I received an email from our AMC district president, or director rather, Ann Mercott from Aiken County. And she is wondering, when it comes to our AMC District 1 meeting in June, whether our board has an opinion on whether it should be in person or virtual. And so I just thought I'd throw that question out to the board here and see what you all thought. Myself, I'd still lean towards the virtual at this point, or I mean, can't really see too far into June and where everything will be at. I'm just be most comfortable keeping things virtual. But I know our vaccinations are moving right along here, and the states are as well, and I presume the districts are as well, but I just don't have as good a feel on that. So what are everyone's thoughts?
Mr. Chair?
Sullivan. Yes, please.
My thought is that meeting virtually right now is probably the safest way to continue. We know that as we hear people from the CDC talk about concerns following spring break and some of the variants, some of which Grace spoke about, I think we should be cautious in our return to normal. And so I would think that maybe meeting virtually would be the best thing at this time. Certainly we can revisit that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Sullivan. Any other thoughts from commissioners? Commissioner Svalson?
I would certainly concur with Commissioner Sullivan on that. And after hearing of our recent issues, here in our vicinity or in our community, we certainly don't want to be listed officially as an event with our gathering. So I would lean initially towards being cautious and scheduling it to be done virtually. If we find between now and then that things truly are progressing, that it would change that, we can always revisit.
Thank you, Commissioner Svalson.
Mr. Chair.
Oh yes, Commissioner Storley.
I would support virtually.
Okay. Commissioner Hawkins, do you concur? Do you have, what's your opinion?
Well, my opinion would be I support maybe a hybrid option. I'm hoping that the governors or the president wanting everybody starting May 1st to be vaccinated. I'm going to hold out hope. But I understand people have different levels of what they feel is they want to do. So I'm hoping that we can, I understand they need to make plans. Should there be a physical place with distancing? So I guess I would say, let's do a hybrid option like the schools do. Those that want to go in person, if you're vaccinated and you feel okay with that, I'd like to have that option. And if you don't, there's nothing wrong with attending by Zoom if that's where you're more comfortable. So I'd like to see both options available.
Yeah, thank you. And it was interesting because Commissioner Marcotte sent out, it was almost a stream of emails. First one was just asking for any news or events or issues that we wanted to share at the monthly meeting, which I did not respond to. But then another one was just around if we have a position for the June District 1 meeting. And then the third one was just that there won't be any items on the agenda that require a vote. And it sounds like a virtual meeting will be held at the close of all potential in-person meeting. So that it sounds like it may be that kind of hybrid situation, but I still will express all of our views as well as the idea of having a hybrid to Commissioner Marcotte there and see if anything changes. So I don't like the idea of having a virtual meeting after all of the in-person meetings. I would rather have it be concurring, just so we're all getting the same information, right? In the district as well as individual commissioners. So I might communicate that in my reply as well. But I think that I'll just say that sounds like mostly virtual from our standpoint, but the option of hybrid would be valuable, and with that the concurrence of the two rather than a post and during or regular meetings. So thank you for that feedback. I greatly appreciate it. Moving on then to item 11B, meetings to note. Speaking about the our tours, and then our AMC April 21st training, which I have not attended that type of training before, so I'm excited for that. Although we have had a taste of the presenter, or at least one of them, at our AMC meetings already, so he'll be a familiar face. And then public hearing for miscellaneous fees, April 27th, 9 a.m. Board of Appeals and Equalization, June 17th at 6 p.m. Moving on to item 12, correspondence and memos. We have the Historical Society board packet as well as the January sales tax report. And we've taken care of our anniversaries, hires, and retirements, our last meeting. So that brings us to our last item on the agenda is adjournment. If no commissioners have any further thoughts, comments, questions, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Thank you, Commissioner Starley. We have a motion. Is there support?
Support.
Thank you, Commissioner Huckins. Roll call vote. Commissioner Storley?
Aye.
Commissioner Huckins?
Aye.
Commissioner Swalson?
Aye.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Aye.
Commissioner Mills is aye as well. We have unanimous approval to adjourn. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.